Thank you, Kate. Thank you everyone for coming to my talk. Today I would like to talk a few courier route optimization problems with applications of freight networks or logistic networks, and considering loading by information and loading by reservation system. So I would like to acknowledge that my collaborators, so Associate Professor Russell Thompson from Infrastructure Engineering, he is an expert in city logistics, and also two master students who have contributed to the project, Shenjie and Peng Yuan. So here is an outline of my talk today. So I would like to start with the background of the urban logistic problems and challenges and opportunities there. Then I'll go through in order three optimization problems. So the first and second optimization problem will look at the logistic optimization problem from a carrier or logistic provider's perspective. And so the first one will deal with a two-echelon vehicle routing problem, considering multimodal courier routing. While the second one extend the first problem into a stochastic environment and take into account the loading by information provision. And we use an agent-based simulation approach to study the problem. And the last problem actually look at the logistic problem or the freight network from an administrator's perspective. So like the local government or council's perspective, and try to coordinate and all the logistic providers, and through using a loading bay reservation system. And so this combined the two echelon vehicle routing problem with a loading bay reservation optimization problem together. And I will conclude the talk with some future directions. So a little bit background of the urban logistics. So currently parcel delivery, in particular in central city areas, are facing a number of challenges. So first one is the increased demand. Well, due to the change of shopping habit, because of younger generations and as well as COVID-19 pandemic, e-commerce and free volume are increasing significantly. Well, this is being observed in many countries, including US and European countries, as well as in Australia. So it is predicted that we'll have a 60% increase in urban free volume by 2040. So you can see from the picture that the warehouses is full of packages. So both the logistic providers and as well as the authority or even the entire logistic network is under pressure for the increased demand. And another challenge is coming from traffic congestion. So because of traffic congestion and restriction, sometimes even the freight curfew, logistic companies having problems of delivering parcels with the promised time frame. And in the meantime, because of the increased demand, there will be more freight vehicles on road, and which will negatively impact the traffic condition. So will make the congestion even worse. So this is kind of endless cycle. We have bad traffic condition, which decrease the performance of the logistics system. And the more demand in the logistics system kind of further toward the traffic condition. And the last challenge I want to mention is about the loading and unloading by spaces. So in Australia, in particular in Melbourne, courier vehicles heavily rely on on-street loading bays for their parcel delivery. And in taking Melbourne CBD, for example, our loading bays are under high utilization all the time. So the research by the master student Shenjie showed that 60% of loading bays in Melbourne CBD experience occupancy over 80%. So the 80% of time, the loading bays are occupied. And for some popular loading bays, almost all the time we'll see a courier van parking there. And so this make the delivery even more difficult because drivers will be cruising the city area, finding a free loading bay, and make the traffic congestion even worse. So this gives you further information about loading bays and their utilization. So you're looking at the loading bays and in front of Melbourne Central. And the right plot is showing the stay duration, the histogram of stay duration of one particular loading bay in Melbourne. So we can see the histogram is heavily skewed and with a really long tail. So we actually cut off the tail by the upper bound here, but you can see that there's quite a lot of long stay violating the time limit, and they're mostly contributed by construction vehicles or road work vehicles, and also illegal parking as well. And for short stays, like just the 1 minute or 2 minutes stay, a lot of them are just the private vehicles illegally parking in loading bays. So you can see it's not just courier vehicles, it's actually everyone is competing for the loading space. And the median of the stay is about 12 minutes. And compared to previous studies showing that for each delivery costs about 5 to 10 minutes, so the median stay is actually indicating that when a courier vehicle parks in the bay, it's either far away from the customer it would like to serve, or is actually servicing multiple customers per stop. And that's the challenge. And we also see opportunities for the parcel distribution. So in particular, there are more transport modes available for logistics, including electrical vehicles, bikes or e-bikes, and also new modes like autonomous vehicles, big ones or small ones, and even drones. I think drones delivery already being used in Australia. And also sensing technology and mobile devices allow we detect the real time, the utilization of loading zones and the track vehicles in the system, courier vehicles in the system. So which gives us the opportunity to track the performance of courier vehicles and also provide their information of where they should park or could park. And for online platforms available for loading bay occupancy information, like Melbourne is offering that, and reservation systems being observed in other countries as well, but not, unfortunately, we don't have it here in Melbourne. So moving to the first problem I would like to present to you. So it's about the courier route optimization. So looking at one particular logistic provider. So here you're looking at the trajectory of one courier distributing parcels in Sydney CBD area. So the blue trajectory is actually for the driving, while the orange trajectory is for walking. And the blue balloon are the parking space. So it's the loading zones where they parked. And the red balloons are the customers they served. So you notice that actually it forms a two-echelon vehicle routing problem, while the upper echelon is the driving of the van, while the lower echelon is the walking. So starting from a loading bay and visiting one or more customers for each parking. And actually this one corresponding to a special case of two-echelon vehicle routing problem called truck and trailer routing problem, because here the two echelons assume actually one courier man is taking care of the two echelons instead of multiple courier men or multiple delivery people doing the two echelon delivery. And apparently there are two transport modes involved, the driving and the walking. And where the vehicle will park largely depend on the driver's knowledge and experience. So they, from their previous experience, they know that which loading zone is likely to be free during which time. So they will pick that one and to do one or more customers, so one or more customers. And for this delivery pattern, it could be applicable in the CBD area or even in the remote areas where you will see dense population or relatively distant residents. And also, it is applicable to drone or autonomous vehicle delivery. So, for example, taking drones, for example, you have vehicles driving around, and at one parking, you have sent one or more drones to serve customers. To model the problem, we'll consider a network represented by a graph with a net of nodes and a set of nodes and a set of edges. So here I kind of consider a Melbourne city like a network and transform it to a graph with loading zones and customers. So here I have loading zones and customer nodes. And then edges will be classified into two sets, including the driving edges. So among all those loading nodes, loading bay nodes, and the pedestrian edges, and which will include loading zone nodes and as well as the customer nodes. And for each bay, I have a set of edges. So starting from that loading bay to the customers going to visit. So of course, the route optimization problem deal with the decision of where to ride, where to walk. So I have two decision variables here. X represents the driving path, while Z representing the walking path. So this is similar to the classic vehicle routing problem, but here because we have two modes, so we have two decision variable sets. And the objective we consider to minimize the total cost, but actually the objective initially is a multi-objective optimization problem, but we decided to do a scalarization approach. So combining the financial, environmental, and social costs together, and eventually have two components. One is the driving associated costs, so representing the labor salary, vehicle routing costs, and the environmental costs, including emission and noise costs. And second component is walking associated cost. So primarily depends on the labor salary. And of course, when we're talking about walking, that could be actually on bike or using drones or autonomous vehicles. So we can simply just change that mathematically, centrally sign. And combining the two components together, we have the overall objective function. So using coefficient alpha to put the importance for reducing the driving time or the driving distance, and the 1 minus alpha in front of the total walking time. So by choosing different alpha, we'll have different interpretation of the objective function. It could be the total cost in terms of money, or it could be total time of the delivery. And here we make two major assumptions. One is that we would like to assume that all loading bays are available. Of course, that's a strong assumption. I will relax it for the later problem. And because all loading bays are available, so vehicle waiting is not needed. So here is simply forbidden. And the mathematical formulation for the two-echelon vehicle problem is here with some extra constraint in the following slide. So with the objective function, here I have capital T to represent the time, the travel time by either driving or walking on a particular edge, ij. So for the constraints, basically I classify them into three sets corresponding to classical vehicle routing problems. So I have the driving part with sub-2 elimination inside and some flow balance constraints, etc. And of course, likewise, I have the walking part, walking route. That's actually another TSP problem. And in between, I have to connect the driving and walking together. Constraint 6 is actually making sure that each customer is serviced exactly once. And here, constraint 7 ensures that if you're going to visit a customer at a particular loading bay, and of course, you need to drive to that loading bay and park there before you can service any customer from there. And a few extra constraints here. We need to respect the loading by time limit. In Australia, we always have a time limit of the usage of the loading bay. In Melbourne, we have either 15 minutes or 30 minutes time limit. So the constraint 12 here is simplifying the walking time when the servicing customers at this loading bay, plus the service time should be less than or equal to the limit, TL. And of course, we're considering couriermen carrying the package or goods to visit multiple customers. Of course, the capacity is constrained. So we have a carrying capacity when the courierman is walking. So this is saying that the total load cannot exceed the carrying capacity. And this constraint also eliminates subtool for the walking route. So that's the modeling side. And to solve that model, we proposed two solutions. One is simply just use that integer program and use the exact method like Ruby to solve the problem, because it's not a very large problem, so it's possible for Ruby to find the optimal solution. And the other approach is genetic algorithm. So genetic algorithm is well known to be able to solve vehicle routing problem quite efficiently and effectively. So here we use genetic algorithm, but slightly change the solution representation, because here we have a two-echelon vehicle routing problem. So here we are looking at a chromosome representation of a solution. So we index all the customers and loading zones. So here I have 10 loading zones or loading bays and 4 customers. So here, depending on whether a loading bay is followed by customer, whether a loading bay is followed by customers, it will be either active or inactive. So for example, 7 is followed by 2 customers. So this is an active loading bay. So correspondingly saying while parking in bay 7, the courierman will visit customer 14 and 13 in order and return to bay 7. And here is another stopping point is at loading bay 8. Now here, instead of doing 2 customers at once, because of the carrying capacity constraint, so we'll do a dedicated trip for customer 12 and another dedicated trip for 11. And I won't spend too much time discussing the cross overall mutation operation, but they're quite typical ones by changing the orders of visiting for loading bays and customers. So for the case study, we'll be using the 2 methods to find the optimal solutions for a courier bin to deliver 7 packages to customers in a Melbourne CBD Lightning network. So it's like more like a grid network. And of course, we will have one direction street, and pedestrian only street as well. So it's similar to Melbourne's network. There are 22 loading bays, and we will test different time limits and alpha values. So let me show you the computation expenses first, because it's relatively straightforward. So we tested 3 values of the time limit with the 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and infinite stay. So you can see that computational cost is actually decreasing while the time limit is increasing, but that kind of sensible. So if you don't have limits, it should be fast for the method to find the optimal solution. And for different alpha values, notice that the more weight we put on driving, the longer the Ruby needs, the exact solution needs to find the optimal solution. Taking the extreme case, alpha of 0.99. So it's really important to reduce the driving time. Ruby will take 20 minutes to find the optimal solution, while the GA algorithm is not sensitive to the parameters we choose. So it always takes less than a minute to find the optimal solution. And GA is capable of finding optimal solution like the Ruby. And in terms of the comparison of the driving distance, walking distance for different time limits and different coefficient alphas. So we noticed that regardless of the time limit we put, so if we increase alpha, so putting more weight, more importance for reducing the driving time, we see, of course, that the driving time decrease or the driving distance decrease, while the walking distance increase. Well, if it's not important to reduce the driving time, first you will simply park, or the courier man will simply park in the loading bay closest to the customer and walk there. Right? But if it's important to reduce the driving time or distance, and it's likely it will park at a particular place and visit multiple customers close by. Well, what is interesting is actually seeing the impacts of the time limits. So looking at different time limits here, I think one particular interesting result I want to highlight is in the extreme case when alpha is really large. So so really important to, let's say, reduce the environmental costs. For really large alpha, we notice that in terms of driving and walking distance, it's better to have no time limit. So if we set TL to infinity, it will result in the smallest walking time as well as the smallest driving time. So what is the practical implication? So taking that extreme case, for example, so if I put alpha to 1 or close to 1, that is indicating something like a freight restriction or curfew, saying, okay, you should spend as little as possible driving time for delivery or the parcels. And with time limit of infinity, so that's basically having the idea of creating a courier hub and having vehicles park in the hub indefinitely if needed, and do the rest of the delivery using environmentally friendly means. So this actually being considered in various places, including in Australia. So actually New South Wales government had a few trials on this. So because they were tackling Sydney's congestion problem. So they actually creating a few courier hubs at the edge of the CBD region. And they equip those courier hubs with lockers or secured cages. And so courier vans could park there. And then for the delivery, they will ride a bike and deliver to the customers in the CBD area. So that's for the first problem. Now moving to the second one. So remember, we had a really big assumption about the first problem, saying all loading bays are available. But in practice, it's not going to happen unless you deliver in midnight. But of course, your customer will be really unhappy. So in practice, loading bays are not always available. Actually, there is a high competition there. And however, the bright side is detection technology can give us real-time occupation information. So this could guide the couriermen to find the loading bays, suitable for them. And because of the loading bay utilization, so couriers may wait somewhere else for a free spare loading bays. And of course, they may even consider parking illegally. So the second problem tried to think still from the courier's perspective and how to optimize their route, taking into consideration of the loading bay competition, and as well as using the information provided by local authority about the utilization of loading bays. So to tackle that problem, we developed an agent-based simulation model with that two-echelon vehicle routing problem embedded. So that problem from the first that model from the first problem is being embedded into the agent-based simulation. So for the agent-based simulation model, it's a really good technique to model real-life problems, because for agents, it's capable, they are capable to learn from the system environment and their experience, and to make decisions based on the knowledge and to fulfill their goals. So this is a lot more like, so for agents, they are more like human of thinking of how to make a good decision, how to develop a good strategy. So agent-based simulation is really good at modeling, human behaviors. And for the system environment, we have loading base, and we're not going to model all the courier vehicles together, but instead we'll have stochastic elements representing dummy vehicles utilizing loading base. So they're not running around in the system, but instead they're just creating kind of background noises or demand for the loading base. And those stochastic agents are simply just with a certain arrival rate, following a certain state duration histogram, but randomly utilize the loading base as long as the courier we are actually worried about is not using that loading base. And so here the diagram is actually showing the how the agents kind of interact with the environment. So the environment of all the loading base being updated based on the action of the courier, and of course the arrival and state duration. And that information will pass to the agent. The agent, which is the courier vehicle, will interpret this information with the assistance of the loading by availability information. And if it's time for the agent to update the delivery route, it will call the two-echelon vehicle routing problem and find an optimal solution based on the current information, and then take an action. And that action will impact the loading bay utilization, of course. And for the loading bay utilization, in addition to the actions taken by the courier vehicle, you are under the stochastic elements, so the stochastic demand. So we will consider two types of demand. One is the uniform demand. So all the vehicles are under uniform demand. So in some cases, we'll consider high demand, medium demand, and low demand. And another scenario we'll consider is actually more close to real life, is that the demand is heterogeneous. So some loading bays are more popular because they're probably, shops or residential areas more dense. So some of them are popular and the others are less popular. So this is a flow chart of the agent-based simulation. I won't go through it in detail, but just quickly show you when the vehicle needs to update their route. Of course, when the vehicle first arrives the system, it needs to optimize the route. Of course, that's kind of initial optimization. And while the vehicle is, running around servicing customers in the system, and of course, they stick to the initial plan. But if it arrives at a loading bay that it would like to parking, but is actually occupied, then it is the time the agent or the courier vehicle need to make a decision whether I should choose another route, or should I wait there, or I should cruise. So this is when they need to make another decision and optimize their route. And when they do optimization, of course, they could take into account the loading bay availability. So here, just a few diagrams demonstrating the result. So similarly, we study the agent-based simulation model with the network I showed you earlier. So on the left-hand side, I have the delivery routes when there's no information, loading by information provided. So the purple part, the purple curves representing the driving trajectory. And you notice that actually the vehicle is cruising a lot in the system, trying to find a loading bay that is available and park there and serves their customer. So there's a lot of circulation here. But on the other hand, so on the right-hand side, I have the occupancy information provided. This is actually the average utilization of loading bays provided to the courier. You notice that there are not many circling. Actually, the driving route is pretty neat. So shorter driving route However, you notice that the red part, which is the walking trajectory, is actually longer. So because of the competition of the highly demanded loading bay, so the vehicle decided to park somewhere a little bit far away from the customer and walk there. Well, that makes sense. This is sacrificing the walking time and in order to find a place to park. And here I compare the delivery time and actually have a breakdown of the 4 components. So I have the service time, driving time, and walking time, and waiting time altogether. And for different scenarios we tested. So let's have a look at the uniform demand case. So just to see the impact of the loading zone demand on the delivery time. So we have the low demand, medium demand, and high demand. So apparently, the result is not surprising. You can see that the mean and variance of driving time is increasing significantly with the low demand. Particularly, you can see the high demand one, so it's almost double the driving time. The walking time is not that strongly affected. This is because the vehicles try to park to the closest loading bay to serve the customer. So we're spending a lot of time kind of, circulating or cruising, find the loading bay, a desired loading bay, the desired loading bay. So the walking time is not significantly impacted. And then under the heterogeneous demand case, so I have the no information provided case, real-time information provided case, and the average occupancy information provided case. So if there's no information provided, you can see that there's a large driving time here, and actually a large variance as well. So when there's information provided, either the real-time information or the average occupancy, you can see significantly decrease in the driving time, so saving all the cruising. And but however, you notice that the overall height is not significantly different. So actually, like I just mentioned, walking time being sacrificed. So you park far away, of course, reduce the cruising part, but there will be long distance walk for the courierman. So you can see an increase in the walking time. And of course, depending on how much priority we would like to, or the system would like to put into the environmental costs or the vehicle costs or the salary costs, we'll have different alphas to see the overall objective function changing with different information provision. And the last one we'll talk about is the all-free case at the beginning. It's actually an ideal case. So it's kind of saying, okay, if all the loading bays are reserved in advance with the preferred time, and there will be a significant benefit for the courier in terms of the driving time as well as the walking time. So actually this kind of is motivating our last problem, the studying the reservation problem, the loading bay reservation problem. So introducing the reservation system is, the idea is to convert the competition of loading bays into coordination or cooperation of the couriers from different companies. And we would like to have, or in the logistic domain, there's always been new concept of improving the overall efficiency and sustainability of the logistics system. So the idea of having a hyper-connected and shared logistics to achieve an all-win situation is where we're heading in the logistics section. And of course, there is a big question about who's going to coordinating the couriers and how to coordinating the couriers. And for the loading bay reservation system, I think that's a good means to cooperate or coordinate couriers, because local authority like City of Melbourne, they are in charge of loading bays. So they could have a system, and through the management of the loading bays and the reservation system, they can coordinate the behavior of couriers. And with a good coordination strategy, they could benefit everyone in the system. So of course, that heavily relies on if we have an efficient loading bay reservation system. So that's what we are going to tackle in the last problem. So in the last problem we're studying is the two-echelon vehicle routing problem integrated with the loading bay reservation problem. So here, instead of looking at one individual courier, we're looking at multiple couriers from different logistic providers and a loading bay reservation system. So of course, the graph will be updated accordingly, and different couriers may have different depots, and they will have different customers to service. So the node sets and the edge set will be updated. They will have vehicles associated with them. And here I'll just give you an illustration of one case with two couriers. So because we have a combo problem, so the solution we're looking for is a routing solution as well as a reservation solution, which make the problem significantly complex. And here, again, we are going to consider a stochastic environment. So we're considering random travel time for both driving and walking, and we'll have random service time as well. So, which means we need to find a stochastic approach to model and solve the problem. So decision variables, in addition to the previous decision variable sets, X and Z, we'll have decision variable set of the reservation. So we'll have the reservation start and end times for each vehicle at each bay. And to better present the problem, we'll define the arrival time and departure time of vehicle at each bay. And to figure out the precedency between two vehicles at the same bay, we need the binary variable O to indicate whether a vehicle arrives before another one or after another one. And for the objective functions, because here in this last problem, we do allow vehicle waiting, so we can't simply just looking at driving time and walking time. So if we're considering salary for drivers, waiting time should be counted. Therefore, the objective function include the driving time, so the driving associated costs represented in the first term, so corresponding to the emission, environmental, and financial costs. And the second term is actually the completion time, so when the vehicle returns to the depot. So that will include all the servicing time, walking time, driving time, and waiting time. And we'll use a similar concept for the coefficient. So that's being put in front of the driving. So I just simply picked a few constraints to show you here. And the approach we chose is a stochastic chance constraint program. Here, we have the chance constraint in the middle. So let me first talk about the arrival and departure constraints. So here I have the arrival time being defined by two inequality. The reason it's being defined by inequality is because we do allow waiting. So we do allow a vehicle to wait before they park in the loading bay or after they leave the loading bay. For the departure time, it's being defined using equality constraint. This is because we try to, we here forbidden waiting inside loading bay. Because if we allow courier wait inside a loading bay, that's simply just wasting the resources. So if they want to wait, they can wait somewhere else, but not inside a loading bay. And we have a deadline because here we do not consider delivery time windows. So we have a deadline for the completion. So the returning time should be less than or equal to the planning horizon, capital H. And the two chance constraints here respect the booking start time and the booking end time. So taking the arrival side as example, this chance constraint is simply saying, okay, arrival time, the actual arrival time should be after the reservation start time. And if this constraint is not, it fails, is not respected, the failure rate or probability is epsilon. So this constraint needs to be respected by at least 1 minus epsilon. And likewise, this is indicating that the departure time should be earlier than the reservation end time. And that needs to be guaranteed with probability 1 minus epsilon. And the last two constraints here are for the booking constraint. So they guarantee there's no booking clash for any vehicles and any bay. Well, to transfer the chance constraints to slightly a simpler form, instead of dealing with the reservation start and end time, we're introducing the concept of grace time. So in this way, we can better interpret how many, what is the slackness we give for the vehicles. So we define the grace time or the start grace time is the difference between the expected arrival and the booking start time. And likewise, the end grace time is between the booking end and the expected departure. So of course, if we stick to the expectation, the grace time will be 0, but because we consider stochastic travel time and service time, so grace time should be non-zero to guarantee the feasibility. And the two policies we consider, we'd like to speed up a little bit. The two policies we consider is the grace time policy and the no early arrival policy. And the no early arrival policy is simply saying we only give grace time at the end. And if you're early, then wait somewhere until your booking start, which is with respect to the expected arrival. You're not allowed to arrive early to use the loading bay. And the approach we use is the hybrid GA. We are going to use the GA we developed for the first two problems and to adopt it here, but combined with a mixed integer program to deal with the grace time allocation problem. So the upper level is the GA, which deals with the vehicle routing. So similarly, just very similar to the previous problem, but here because we have multiple vehicles, so their routes will be stacked as a so each row will represent the routing of one vehicle. So how many vehicles we have, we'll have that many rows. And once the upper level GA determine the routing, the lower level mixed integer program will allocate the grace time. So once the GA determine the routing part, of course, we will have the expected arrival and expected departure. Then the remaining gap is the flexibility we have for the mixed integer program to allocate the grace time. If there's actually no gap there, nothing we can do. But if there's some time available in between, MIP will find the optimal grace time for it. And the objective function for the lower level mixed integer program is simply just the violation of the chance constraint. So P here, P sub A here is simply the penalty for the arrival side when violating the chance constraint. And ideally, we would like the objective function to be 0, which means the chance constraints are respected. Won't go through the formulation, but I think if you're interested now, I'm happy to discuss after the talk. So for the fitness function, basically composed of the objective function, which is using the sample approximation algorithm to get the expectation, and together with two penalty terms. And each penalty term corresponding to the penalty applied to one type of infeasibility. So for example, this penalty term try to penalize if there's any booking clash. It will be this one. So if you have, because GA does not respect the booking constraint. So if GA actually violate the booking constraint, the first term will penalize it. And the second term is penalizing the violation of chance constraint. Okay, so for a feasible solution, we will need both terms to be 0. And for another booking clash in terms of grace time, that actually being guaranteed by the mixed integer program constraint. So we don't need to penalize it in the fitness function. And go to the case study. For the numerical setting, actually we're still doing some tests at the moment for different scenarios. So I'm just showing you a very preliminary result. So we tested a few scenarios with 2 vehicles, 5 vehicles, or 10 vehicles in the system. Again, in the smaller network setting. And here we will have more delivery tasks, up to 150. And the absolute tolerance we consider is 0.1. And the grace time upper bound is 20 minutes. And we have a sample of 200. And for all the stochastic parameters, we have truncated normal distributions. And here I can show you the comparison of different policy. So those policies are just what I explained. The deterministic one is simply just when we reduce the variance to 0. So basically just the deterministic case. For the ideal case, I wanted to explain you. So the ideal case would be simply consider each vehicle individually without others' inference and combine the objective function together. That actually could be possible in real life as long as you can spread them all over the time. So there will be no interaction between any couriers. So that's why I call it ideal case. But of course, you will have a time limit sign in the morning or the whole day. You need to have all the deliveries finished. So there will definitely be some interactions and interference. So in terms of, let me show you, discuss the runtime, the computation time, and the generation. So here we do have early termination. So you see that the number of generation is different from case to case. So we can see that, of course, the determinist case is the fastest one and with the fewest generation. And the no early arrival, because it does not need to consider both grace time, or the 2 grace times, so it's much faster than the general grace time policy. And this is particularly true for the larger instance. So you can see the time difference here. And in terms of the objective functions, kind of interesting. So you can see that comparing the no early arrival, it's slightly worse than the GT case when there are only 2 vehicles. But however, if we have more competition, so 5 vehicles in the system, the no early arrival one is actually better. So it's saying, okay, we can sacrifice some waiting time, so even pay the driver extra time while they're waiting there doing nothing. But overall, the objective function is better in that case, instead of letting them in when they are early. And if we're looking at the time break here, so I'm showing you 5 vehicle cases, breaking the driving time and walking time. You can see that actually the no early arrival case benefiting the driving time as well as the walking time. So slight, well, of course, the benefit is probably more pronounced for the driving case. So because you're using the GT case, grace time case, you could potentially have a lot of redundancy, time reserved for early arrival, but that won't be efficient in terms of the resource utilization. And here I'll just show you a little bit about the impact of variance. Of course, when the variance increase, we will see the objective function increase. And for the loading bay utilization, no early arrival would not need the grace time at the beginning. So the utilization or the requirement for loading bay is much smaller than the GT policy. And the last one is for the largest instance we tested, it was 10 vehicles, because this is really time consuming. So I'm only showing you the deterministic case. So comparing here is the total delivery time between with the reservation system and without the reservation system. So we can see with the reservation system, the walking time, driving time, as well as the total delivery time get improved. So this is the percentage. All those times get improved compared to the system when everyone's just running around without the idea of which loading bay is available. And at the individual level, so this is at the system level, all 10 vehicles. The individual case, I'm showing you the time difference in terms of delivery time for each individual courier in the system when there's reservation available and when there's no reservation available. So this is the time saving when there's a reservation, loading bay reservation system. So they all stay above the zero. So that means every courier is benefiting from the reservation system. So we're not sacrificing anyone in the system. So I want to finally conclude my talk. So apparently the information provision is benefiting the system and as well as the reservation system, hoping that the reservation will be considering in the future in Australia. And in terms of future work, and here we are actually dealing with more like an offline optimization. So we do not intake a real-time booking, but in practice, it is possible we can think about real-time booking. So requests that arrive over time, and also pricing strategy. So we could give charge couriers for using loading bays, or if not, we can give them credits. So they will have a certain amount of credits they can use, and they can decide how they're going to use at different times. But the final comment I want to make is actually an even better solution to the logistic problem is to consider joint delivery. So it's not just to try to coordinate their behavior, but if we can consolidate the parcel delivery all together, so not competition, but actually doing a global optimization, and that will be considered more promising in terms of improving the logistics system. That's the end of my talk. I'm a little bit over time.